Maria stood frozen as her husband's hand gripped her arm tighter. "Get out of my house!" he snarled, dragging her toward the door while 50 guests watched in silence. Her tears fell, but no one moved to help. Then a car pulled up outside, and an old man stepped out who would change everything. Before we dive into this powerful story, hit that subscribe button if you believe karma always finds its way. Ring the bell so you never miss stories that remind us why kindness matters. Now, let's begin. Maria had learned to make herself small. It wasn't something she decided one day. It happened gradually, like water wearing down stone. 5 years of marriage had taught her that taking up less space meant less conflict. Speaking softer meant fewer arguments. Asking for less meant disappointing no one. She stood in the kitchen of her home on Maple Street that Saturday evening, watching caterers arrange expensive appetizers on silver trays. The house hummed with voices and laughter from the living room, where 50 guests mingled. Liam had insisted on this party. Their 5th anniversary deserved celebration, he'd said. Something memorable. Maria had suggested dinner at the small Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. Just the two of them, maybe a bottle of wine, quiet conversation. Liam had laughed. "We're not college kids anymore, Maria. I have a reputation to maintain." So here they were, surrounded by his business associates and their wives, people Maria had met perhaps twice in passing. She smoothed down her cream-colored dress, the one she'd found on the clearance rack 3 months ago. It was simple, modest, appropriate, or so she'd thought. Walking through the living room earlier, she'd noticed the other women in their designer outfits, bold reds, shimmering golds, elegant whites with intricate beading. They looked like they belonged in a magazine. Maria looked like she belonged in the background. Scarlett had made sure she knew it. Liam's mother appeared beside her near the bookshelf, a glass of wine in her manicured hand. She'd looked Maria up and down with that expression she wore so well, not quite disapproval, but something close to resigned disappointment. "You look like the help, dear," Scarlett had said, her voice low enough that only Maria could hear. There was no cruelty in her tone, just observation, a statement of fact. Maria had tried to smile. "I thought this was appropriate." Appropriate for what? Serving coffee at a meeting? Scarlett patted her shoulder the way you might pat a child who'd tried their best, but still failed. "Well, you are what you are, I suppose. Liam knew what he was getting when he married you." Before Maria could respond, Scarlett had drifted away into the crowd, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and cheaper judgment. Liam found her 20 minutes later. He looked handsome in his tailored gray suit, his hair perfectly styled, his smile bright and practiced. The smile he wore for clients and investors, not the one she used to see when they were alone. "Maria, can you help pass drinks around?" he asked, gesturing toward the caterers. She blinked. "There are servers here. I thought, they're overwhelmed. Just help out for a bit." His smile tightened slightly. "Don't embarrass me, okay? These people are important." So Maria picked up a tray. She moved through the rooms of her own home, offering wine and champagne to people who barely glanced at her. Some said thank you. Most simply took glasses and continued their conversations as if she were invisible. She supposed in a way she was. Just another server in a cream dress, background noise to their important discussions about markets and mergers. Near the back window, she approached Liam and his friend Roger. Roger was a lawyer, sharp-featured and always impeccably dressed. They stood close together, voices low. Maria offered them drinks. "Thanks," Roger said, taking a glass without looking at her. They didn't pause their conversation. "Once the papers are signed, everything transfers to you," Roger was saying. "Clean and simple. She won't have any claim." Maria's hand trembled slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. "Papers? What papers?" "And she won't suspect anything?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a murmur. "Why would she? You've been careful. She trusts you." Roger sipped his wine. "By the time she realizes what's happened, it'll be too late to contest anything." They moved away toward the dining room, still talking. Maria stood there with her tray, something cold and heavy settling in her chest. She told herself she'd misunderstood, misheard, They were probably discussing a client's case. Liam handled business deals all the time, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. An hour passed. Maria retreated to the kitchen, setting down the tray. She gripped the counter, trying to steady herself. Through the doorway, she could see the party continuing, people laughing, drinking, enjoying themselves. No one had noticed her absence. Then the sharp sound of glass against metal rang through the house. Once, twice, 3 times. The conversations died down. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please?" Liam's voice carried clearly from the living room. Maria's stomach twisted. She walked to the doorway, looking out at the assembled guests. They'd all turned toward Liam, who stood in the center of the room with his glass raised. People were smiling, expecting a toast. An anniversary speech, perhaps. Something sweet and romantic. Liam's eyes found Maria. For just a moment, she saw something in his expression, not love, not regret, just cold calculation. Then he spoke. "I need to say something important. I've been pretending for a long time and I can't do it anymore." The room was perfectly silent. "Maria," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like smoke. Maria couldn't move, couldn't process what she'd just heard. Around the room, guests shifted uncomfortably. A few looked at their phones. No one met her eyes. "I'm sorry to do this here," Liam continued, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "But I've been carrying this weight, and it's time to be honest. I married you thinking you'd grow into this life, that you'd become more suitable. But you haven't changed. You're still the same girl who worked at that bookstore, content with small dreams and smaller ambitions." Maria tried to speak, but her throat had closed. She stood in the kitchen doorway, 50 pairs of eyes on her, and found she had no voice. "You're comfortable being invisible," Liam said, "and I need someone who can stand beside me, not behind me serving drinks." A few people in the crowd looked away. Others watched with the uncomfortable fascination of witnessing an accident. Scarlett stood near the fireplace, nodding slowly, as if this all made perfect sense. Roger stepped forward then, pulling papers from his jacket pocket. "The house is in Liam's name alone," he said, his lawyer voice professional and detached. "As are the cars, the savings accounts, and all joint assets. We've reviewed everything carefully." Maria finally found words. "I signed papers. We bought this house together. I remember—" "You signed what I put in front of you," Liam interrupted. "Did you ever actually read any of those documents, Maria? Did you ever ask questions, or did you just trust me and sign wherever I pointed?" Heat flooded her face because it was true. She'd trusted him completely. When he brought home papers about refinancing or account transfers, she'd simply signed. He was good with finances. She wasn't. Why wouldn't she trust her husband? "There are some irregularities with several signatures," Roger added, "but that's a matter for later discussion." The implication hung heavy in the air. Maria understood then, with perfect clarity, what she'd overheard earlier. The papers, the plan. He'd been preparing this for months, maybe years, slowly transferring everything into his name alone, making sure she'd have nothing when he finally decided she wasn't useful anymore. Liam crossed the room toward her. His movements were calm, unhurried. He took her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't easily pull away. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said quietly. "This is my home," Maria whispered, but even she could hear how weak it sounded. "Check the deed. It's my home." He began walking her toward the front door. "You can pick up your personal items another time, under supervision." The guests parted as they moved through the living room. Maria searched their faces for something: sympathy, outrage, anything. A few women looked uncomfortable. Most simply watched. No one said a word. No one moved to help. Scarlett sipped her wine near the window, her expression unchanged. Roger followed behind them, still holding his papers. Liam reached the front door and opened it. Cool evening air rushed in. Outside the street was quiet, dark except for the glow of streetlights. He was actually going to do this, put her out like unwanted furniture while everyone watched. Maria felt tears finally break free, running down her cheeks. She hated that she was crying, hated giving him the satisfaction, but 5 years of her life had just been dismissed in front of strangers, and she couldn't hold it back anymore. "Liam, please," she started. That's when headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. A car pulled up slowly, expensive and dark silver, not a car Maria recognized. Liam paused, his hand still on her arm, watching as the vehicle stopped near the front steps. The engine cut off, the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was elderly, perhaps in his mid-70s, wearing a suit that spoke of wealth without shouting it. Distinguished gray hair, sharp eyes, a face lined with age but still strong. 2 other people emerged from the back seat, a younger woman with a leather folder and a man carrying a briefcase. Liam's grip on Maria's arm loosened slightly. "Can I help you?" he called out, his voice uncertain for the first time that evening. The old man walked toward them with measured steps. He didn't look at Liam. His eyes were fixed entirely on Maria, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Granddaughter?" Maria blinked, confusion cutting through her misery. I don't understand. I don't have any—" "Your mother's name was Catherine," the man said, still watching her carefully. "Catherine Whitmore. She left home 30 years ago after we argued. I was stubborn and proud. I let her go. I've been looking for her ever since." The guests had moved to the doorway now, curious about this interruption. Liam stood frozen, still holding Maria's arm, but seemingly forgotten that he was doing so. "My mother died 6 years ago," Maria said softly, "before I met Liam. Her name was Catherine, but her last name was Torres. She never mentioned—" "She took her husband's name, your father." The old man's eyes softened. "I didn't know about him until recently. Didn't know she'd married, had a child. I was too late to reconcile with her, but—" He pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket, old and creased. "This is my daughter when she was your age." He handed it to Maria. Her hands trembled as she looked at the image. The woman in the photo could have been Maria herself. Same dark hair, same eyes, same slight frame. The resemblance was unmistakable. "My name is Edward Whitmore," the man continued. "I've spent 30 years searching for my daughter. 6 months ago, I learned she'd passed away. But I also learned she had a daughter. You." Maria's mind couldn't keep up. "How did you find me?" "Records. Birth certificates. It took time, but I found you 3 months ago." Edward glanced at Liam, then back to Maria. "I didn't want to disrupt your life without understanding it first, so I watched from a distance, had people observe quietly just to know who you were." The woman with the folder stepped forward. "We've documented your weekly volunteer work at the library, the way you help Mrs. Chen next door with her groceries every Thursday, your kindness to the homeless man who sits outside the bookstore where you used to work. We wanted to know your character before making contact," Edward said. "Then, 2 weeks ago, we learned about tonight, about the plan." His gaze shifted to Liam, and though his voice remained calm, something hard entered it. "About the systematic theft and fraud." Liam's face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man with the briefcase opened it, pulling out a thick folder. Property transfer documents with forged signatures, bank account manipulations dating back 3 years, investment accounts emptied and moved to personal holdings, all carefully documented. He looked at Liam with professional detachment. "We've had investigators tracking your movements and transactions for the past 14 days. Roger, still standing in the doorway, tried to step back into the crowd. Edward's assistant, the woman with the folder, spoke without turning around. "I wouldn't leave if I were you, Mr. Roger. The authorities will want to speak with both of you." "This is ridiculous," Liam said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You can't just show up and make accusations." "I'm not making accusations," Edward interrupted quietly. "I'm stating facts. You've been defrauding my granddaughter for years, preparing to leave her with nothing." Tonight was meant to be the final humiliation, ensuring she'd be too broken to fight back. He paused. I called the police before I arrived. They should be here shortly. As if summoned, blue and red lights appeared at the end of the street. The next 20 minutes moved like a dream. Police officers entered the house, professional and efficient. Edward's attorney presented the documented evidence, files thick with papers, photographs, bank statements. Maria watched as Liam's carefully constructed world collapsed around him. He tried to argue at first, then to negotiate, finally to simply leave. The officers were polite but firm. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Roger received the same treatment, his face gray with shock. Scarlett had disappeared somewhere during the commotion. The guests fled like roaches when the lights came on, suddenly remembering appointments and early mornings. Within 20 minutes, the house was empty except for Maria, Edward, the attorneys, and 2 officers taking statements. Maria sat on the couch in her living room, Liam's living room, legally speaking, and tried to understand what had just happened. Her husband was being arrested. A grandfather she'd never known existed had appeared like something from a story. Everything she'd thought was real had turned out to be carefully constructed lies. Edward sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. I know this is overwhelming, he said gently. You don't have to make any decisions tonight. I have a guest house on my property, completely separate, fully furnished. You can stay there as long as you need, no expectations, or I can arrange a hotel, whatever makes you comfortable. Maria looked around the room. 5 years she'd lived here. 5 years of making herself smaller, quieter, less. 5 years of believing that love meant accepting whatever was offered and being grateful for it. I don't want to stay here, she said quietly. Then we'll go. Edward stood, offering his hand. Whenever you're ready. Maria glanced around one more time, at the expensive furniture Liam had chosen, the art on the walls she'd never liked but never said anything about, the home that had never really been hers, even when she'd believed it was. She picked up her purse from the side table. Nothing else. She didn't want anything from this house, this life, this version of herself who'd accepted crumbs and called it a feast. I'm ready, she said. They walked out together into the cool night air. The police cars were gone now, taking Liam and Roger to be processed and charged. A few neighbors stood on their porches, watching. Maria didn't look at them. Edward's car was warm and quiet. Maria sat in the back seat, watching her house disappear behind them. She thought she'd feel sad or angry or something sharp and immediate. Instead, she felt strangely hollow, like a book with all its pages removed, waiting to see what would be written next. 3 months later, Maria sat in Edward's study, reviewing property investment proposals. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, warming the hardwood floors. She'd started taking business courses online, reading books about finance and real estate development, not because Edward asked her to, but because she wanted to understand, wanted to never again sign something without knowing exactly what it meant. Edward had been patient. The guest house was indeed separate, a small cottage on his estate with its own entrance, kitchen, everything she needed. He never pushed, never demanded, just offered opportunities and let her choose. What do you think of the commercial development proposal? He asked now, looking over his reading glasses. Maria studied the documents. 3 months ago she would have said she didn't know, didn't understand, whatever he thought was best. Now she pointed to a specific clause. The environmental impact assessment seems incomplete. We should request more detailed studies before committing. Edward smiled. Good catch. I agree. He made a note on the file. You have a sharp eye for details. I'm learning, Maria said. She was, slowly. Learning to trust her own judgment, learning that having opinions didn't make her difficult, learning that taking up space wasn't selfish. Liam's trial was approaching. The prosecutors had reached out several times, asking if Maria would testify. She'd said yes, not for revenge. She'd found she wasn't angry anymore, just sad for all the wasted years. But the truth mattered. What he'd done was wrong, and pretending otherwise would make her complicit in her own erasure. Scarlett had called twice. Maria hadn't answered. Maybe someday she would. Maybe she'd even forgive the quiet cruelties, the subtle dismissals that had convinced Maria she was less than. But not yet. Some wounds needed time. In the evenings, Maria walked through Edward's gardens. The estate was beautiful. Rolling lawns, old trees, flowers she was learning to name. She'd started painting again, something she hadn't done since college, small watercolors of the garden, the cottage, the way light fell through leaves at sunset. Edward had asked to buy one. She'd said no. He'd looked hurt until she explained, "These are mine. I'm not ready to give them away yet. Maybe someday, but right now I need something that's just mine." He'd understood. "Of course they're yours. Everything you create is yours." Such a simple concept. But Maria was still learning it. She thought sometimes about the woman who'd stood in that doorway, crying while her husband dragged her toward the street. That woman had believed she deserved nothing more than what was offered, had thought that making herself invisible was the price of being loved. Maria wasn't angry at her, just deeply, quietly sad for her, for all the years spent shrinking, for all the words swallowed, for every moment she'd chosen silence over her own voice. But that woman had needed to break before she could rebuild, needed to lose everything she thought she had to discover what she'd actually never possessed: dignity, choice, the simple right to exist fully in her own life. Edward appeared in the study doorway. "I'm meeting with the board this afternoon. Would you like to join? You don't have to speak if you're not comfortable, but I thought you might want to observe." 3 months ago, Maria would have said no immediately. Too nervous, too unprepared, too everything. Now she considered carefully. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." He smiled. "Good. We leave in an hour." As Edward walked away, Maria turned back to the window. Outside, gardeners worked among the flowers. Birds moved through the trees, life continuing, as it always did. She was part of it now. Not watching from the margins, not serving invisible in the background, but present, real, here. She picked up her phone, looked at Scarlett's missed calls. Her finger hovered over the number, then moved away. Not today. Perhaps not ever. Some bridges didn't need rebuilding. Some distances were healthier than proximity. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11. Maria gathered her notes for the meeting. She wore a burgundy suit she'd chosen herself, professional and confident. It fit her properly because she'd insisted on tailoring instead of accepting something off the rack that was close enough. She was learning that close enough wasn't actually enough, that she deserved things that fit. Clothes, relationships, life itself. In the mirror by the door, Maria caught her reflection. For the first time in years, she recognized the woman looking back. Not someone's wife, someone's disappointment, someone's burden. Just herself, flawed, learning, growing, but finally, undeniably real. She picked up her briefcase and walked toward the door. Edward was waiting. The board meeting would be challenging. She'd probably make mistakes, but she'd show up, speak up, take up space. Because that's what she did now. She existed loudly in her own life. And if that made her unsuitable for some people, well, let them find someone else to make small. Maria was done disappearing. Thank you for watching this story. If it made you think about the value we place on ourselves and the people in our lives, give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't determined by how others see them. Drop a comment with your thoughts. I read everyone. Subscribe for more stories that make us reflect on what really matters. And remember, the quietest pain often speaks the loudest truth. See you in the next story.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment, every detail in the story has brought you emotions, thoughts, and maybe a little joy or motivation. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that the next stories will continue to accompany you and touch your heart.